Hello and welcome to this video where we're looking at chapter 9 and 10 of Frankenstein. Chapter 9 and 10 where we start to meet the creature in chapter 10, and we start to see Victor's ascent to meet the creature in the mountains in chapter 9 as well. There's a few kind of key ideas. So if you remember, chapter 8 was Victor feeling a sense of guilt for having stood by as Justine was murdered, and chapter 9 starts with Victor kind of discussing those feelings a bit further. So Shelley has him right here. I wandered like an evil spirit, for I committed deeds of mischief beyond description horrible. And it's interesting that Victor refers to himself as an evil spirit, something often used to refer to the creature. And he recognised the horrible deeds that he's done here as well. Now all was blasted. It's interesting that it was the blasted stump by the lightning that sparked his curiosity as a child, and now everything is blasted. His brother has been brutally murdered, child as well. One of his childhood friends has been wrongly accused of the murder, and the creature is still at large as well. And I was seized by remorse and a sense of guilt, which hurried me away to a hell of intense tortures, such as no language can describe. And I suppose we've got to think about, Shelley includes Victor as our first person because, he has stood by and watched as Justine has been murdered. He could have said something. And, is this guilt justified, really? Is this, a narrative of self-pity as well, which could potentially be one of Victor, an element of Victor's hamartia there as well. We often say he doesn't take responsibility, which is true. But is this self-pitying narrative, this self-indulgent narrative, is that part of it as well? And it's quite interesting. Victor talks about the nature, and he goes out on the lake on page 71, and I was tempted to plunge into the silent lake that the waters might close over me and my calamities forever. So he talks about suicide here, something that Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley's mother, attempted many times in the River Thames in her life. And this idea that, potentially, obviously, something Shelley, with the various issues she's faced in her life, may well have considered, given her kind of tumultuous relationship with Percy Shelley and a difficult relationship with a father who disowned her for a relationship with Percy, and obviously her mother dying just as she was born. So there's references to suicide there as well. Suicide, of course, would have been a sin against God here, but it shows Victor's fragile mental state in chapter 9 here, and the sense of guilt, and whether we can consider it to be self-pity. There's a definite sense of guilt and kind of a strong, painful emotion, Victor, that Shelley presents here. But Victor does stop short by his family, and particularly Elizabeth, and he acknowledges that Elizabeth's existence was bound up in mine, and this idea obviously hinting at their marriage later on. But also, for the first time, really acknowledging that he is responsible for Elizabeth as a woman at the time. And got to feel sorry for Elizabeth in Frankenstein, because she is essentially a victim of every man in the novel. She's kind of picked, if you like, to be Victor's sister / bride / cousin, by a combination of Alphonse and Caroline, Victor's mother and father, and then her fate is bound up with Victor's, and of course she is now tied to this course of actions that Victor has set in place there. And it's interesting that we're going to meet the creature in chapter 10 in more detail, but when Victor thinks of the creature, I gnashed my teeth, my eyes became inflamed, and I ardently wished to extinguish that life which I had so thoughtlessly bestowed. There's quite a lot of aggressive imagery here as well. Gnashing of teeth is a biblical reference. It's often used to refer to devils in the Bible. There's much kind of wailing, and gnashing of teeth is the biblical quote there as well. And gnashing is quite a violent action with your jaws. And it's interesting that my eyes became inflamed, and I wished to extinguish that life. And so when Victor thinks of the creature, he's angry, but more than angry, Victor is than the creature, and it's particularly important to remember that the aggression we see in Victor's first person narrative, as Shelley presenting him as the narrator, is interesting when we actually finally meet the creature in chapter 10. So Victor continues to reflect on this, and again, we've seen this in chapter 8, chapter 7. I not indeed, but in effect was the true murderer. Victor acknowledging that he's done something wrong on page 72 here as well. And Victor essentially just goes kind of walking, Switzerland, beautiful countryside, mountains, lakes, very kind of calm and peaceful. And this does have an impact on Victor. The weight upon my spirit was sensibly lightened as I plunged yet deeper in the ravine of Arve. So we've got a kind of a river there, and he goes walking along the river, and he feels himself becoming lightened and becoming happier with nature. And it's interesting the role that nature plays. Obviously, we've got the romantic movement with the capital R, this idea mind and reflect each other. And you've also got this idea of the soothing power of nature that Shelley presents in Frankenstein, to lighten both Victor and to act almost as a surrogate mother to the creature, which we see in the novel later on. And his mood was augmented and rendered sublime by the mighty Alps, whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered above all, as belonging to another earth, the habitations of another race of beings. This idea that the Alps, if you ever get a chance to see them, just enormous mountains, so beautiful and breathtaking. And obviously there's the reference to the sublime here in terms of the word Shelley used, and also in terms of the technique. This is nature at its most powerful and beautiful and sublime. And it's interesting that Shelley used this as belonging to another earth, the habitations of another race of beings, because in chapter 10 we see that it is the habitation of another race of beings, because the creature lives there. Has this creature kind of adopted that, one of the most powerful aspects of nature. And it's quite interesting as well, just at the end of chapter 9, Victor, kind of carries on his journey here, and he's listening to the rushing of the Arve, so the river, and the same lulling sounds acted as a lullaby to my too keen sensations, and Victor just falls asleep by the river. And it's quite interesting that we don't see yet the creature's kind of early years, but this is the sort of thing you'd expect from the creature. This idea, the lulling sounds acted as a lullaby, almost kind of Victor's being soothed by nature, almost as a baby is really here with a lullaby. And it kind of it's interesting that there's reference to lullaby, the childish reference. It does almost foreshadow the creature's arrival, and we kind of think about the creature there who has been left to fend for himself in nature, but also this idea, a strong kind of romantic element that there's kind of the rustling of a river, the rushing of a river can soothe Victor back to sleep as well. So in chapter 9 you've got lots of just details of nature and how powerful that's used, and that could be interesting if you did get an extract with nature in there. And it's also used to soothe Victor, and even then we know that isn't going to last very long as well. And there's a bit more nature in chapter 10 as well. The solemn silence, this glorious presence chamber of imperial nature, was broken only by the brawling waves or the fall of some vast fragments. So the power of nature is starting to be hinted at here. The brawling waves, again, an aggressive adjective. The fall of some vast fragments, the thunder sound of the avalanche, or the cracking. So we've got some kind of more aggressive verbs and adjectives used to describe nature, again potentially foreshadowing the creature's arrival. And it's interesting, this idea of nature's only broken by these things as well, but nature has been broken by Victor already in the novel, because he has played God. He has taken on the role of the sublime, the role of nature, the capital N. The imperial power of nature has gone. So there's a hint that the natural order has been broken by Victor here, and he is in some way going to be punished. And it's interesting that we meet the creature later on in chapter 10, and Shelley foreshadows that here. What will rain and storm to me as well? This idea that that the storm, we've seen the creature. We've met the creature in the storm earlier on, and again foreshadowing his arrival. And on page 76 you've got this lovely moment here. We'll go through page 77 in a minute, but you can see from the sheer volume of highlighting it will be quite a good extract to get in your exam. But my heart, which was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy. I exclaimed, "Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life." This is a lovely structural moment here, where you've got Victor's dialogue with nature, Victor screaming, if you like, at the top of the mountain, that one, my heart which was before sorrowful now swelled with something like joy. So he can't bring himself to joy yet because of what's happened, the murder of William, Justine as well. But he's starting to feel something like joy, and he kind of, he playfully shouts out to nature, allow me a little bit of happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life. And then in the next paragraph, as I said this creature comes bounding towards him. And this idea that, he's saying this jokingly towards nature. God, it's so beautiful. If I can't enjoy this, you might as well take me now. And sure enough, the creature comes towards him as well. This idea that he can't even get any joy out of nature, because in the next paragraph, the creature is bounding towards him, and that juxtaposition of his joy, his kind of standing on a perfectly white mountaintop, just shouting out to nature. And then bang, the creature approaches, and the creature advances towards him with superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevices in the ice. His stature seemed to exceed that of a man. And this idea that, at the bottom of page 76, the creature is presented as with superhuman speed. He is superhuman. It's interesting, actually, the word superhuman, super implying above, this idea. So, even with that adjective, describing the speed he's running, we're almost hinting at something better than humanity. Obviously, he's faster than humanity because it's superhuman speed, but super meaning above human. Is the creature above human? Is he superhuman throughout the novel in terms of his physical appearance, but also in terms of the way he behaves? He behaves more humanely than most humans. I know he commits the murders, but it's something to consider when we kind of meet him and the way he reasons. And this idea as well that he's always physically stronger than Victor. Victor's hamartia, we've mentioned his inability to take responsibility. We've mentioned his self-pity. Another one is the fact that he thinks he can defeat the creature, who survived on a raft in the ice in the North Pole, runs with superhuman speed, jumps across mountains. And it's interesting that the kind of the response again that Victor gets, and what we've done is highlighted some bits. This would be an excellent extract again, your exam, but there's a lot here to pick out. There's lots of one-word quotations, some of them doing the same thing. First of all, we've got things like wretch, we've got devil, vile insect. There are more as well here, but more as well, the demon as well. Victor labels the creature as all these things: a wretch, a devil, a demon, a vile insect. This idea that he labels them these things. We've got abhorred monster, fiend that thou art, wretched devil as well. So many words used to describe the creature, linking to Victor, or Shelley uses these words, and this idea that they all become a self-fulfilling prophecy because the creature's father is labelling him as these things. He becomes them because he's rejected through Victor's devilish or wretched behaviour or vile behaviour. The creature becomes a vile insect or a devil. So there's lots of kind of interesting points to discuss there about the way the way Shelley uses the language here to refer to the creature as being kind of a monster, and hints at his kind of wickedness. But actually these things he becomes wicked because of the way he's treated and because he's called wicked. I tremble with rage and horror and wanted to close him in with mortal combat, and this idea that Victor thinks that he can kill the creature here, and he's blinded by his fury for the creature. Rage and hatred at first deprived me of utterance, so he's so angry, so furious with the creature he can't even physically speak, and he wants to trample and make the creature extinct, and he links the diabolical murder of his friends as well. And so we see through Victor's narrative and the dialogue, because it's Victor who speaks first, how angry he is. You see his fury here. Shelley sees as this, and it's beautifully juxtaposed with the creature's first line. I expected this reception, said the demon. And he's called a demon in Victor's narrative. Again, we're still seeing things through Victor's eyes, and Victor still labels him a demon. So this creature, this kind of hideous being, this murderer, speaks perfect English, speaks with reason, doesn't respond with anger or aggression to Victor. I expected this reception. And he actually goes further. Shelley has him challenging Victor. You propose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Challenging Victor. How dare you sport with life? How dare you create something and not look after it? Treat life as if it's a sport or a game, because obviously the way that Victor has been brought up as a child, to kind of not view life as just it's something that he's entitled to, and that sense of entitlement there as well. We've also got, we talked about revolution, this kind of class challenge. How dare you as an upper class citizen sport thus with life, sport thus with my life as the creature, with Justine's life as a lower class woman as well. How dare you do that as well? And this idea that if you do what I want, then I'll leave you alone, but if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death. Some lovely aggressive imagery. This idea that Victor the creature is going to destroy Victor's family and glut the maw of death. Aggressive verb, glut. The maw of death as well. It's a really dark imagery of the kind of the power and the gory details and power of the creature. And this gets a response of abhorred monster, fiend thou art, wretched devil. Perhaps not an important one, but I do really enjoy the fact that Mary Shelley uses "come on then," as if Victor's offering the creature out for a fight here, that I may extinguish the spark which I so negligently bestowed. And this is a father telling his child, I negligently bestowed, I was wrong to have made you as well. My rage was without bounds. I sprang on him, impelled by all the feelings which can arm one being against the other, and he easily eluded me. So Victor is blinded by his hatred, his desire for revenge against the creature, and the creature just avoids him because he's physically stronger, he's physically more able, and urges you, he doesn't get involved in the fight. I entreat you to hear me. I want you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Victor's blinded by his rage, and the creature says, I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature. Interesting use of the pronoun there, thy, belonging to you, and I'll be mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt perform thy part which thou owest me. I ought to be thy Adam, but I'm rather the fallen angel. A lovely quotation there, so we're right at the bottom of page 77. I ought to be thy Adam, so I ought to be, you're my God, and I ought to be like Adam, Adam who committed sin, Adam ate the apple from the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden and learned all God's powers as a result of Eve. So, Adam commits sin, he was cast out of the Garden of Eden, but God was merciful towards Adam. But the creature is the fallen angel, the creature is Lucifer, and we look at kind of Paradise Lost later on. The creature is the one who was promised the Garden of Eden and wasn't given it, and rather, being given this kind of sense of paradise, being with Victor as a family, the creature is completely rejected by Victor and every single member of society as well, and has fallen completely. And it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting points that ability that Victor owes the creature as well, repeated there. And Victor doesn't want to listen to this as well. We are enemies, and it's a choice that Victor makes. And the creature further entreats him. I was benevolent, my soul glowed with love and humanity, but am I not alone, miserably alone? And this idea, I was benevolent, the creature was capable of kindness, my soul glowed with love and humanity. And bear in mind, for the previous 76 pages, we've seen nothing but pretty much how evil the creature is. Not 76 pages obviously, but for most of the novel, how evil the creature is, how wicked he is through Victor's first person narration, through Walton's kind of narration at the start of the boat, and now we're starting to see this idea the creature was kind, and we now as a narrator can judge for ourselves the responsibility the creature has for these murders compared to Victor, and how perhaps the creature does take more responsibility. The reason that Shelley has the creature speak with, the fact that the creature can speak in kind of fluent English as well. You accuse me of murder, and yet you would, with a satisfied conscience, destroy your own creature. And it's interesting here as well that the creature could be talking about himself because Victor wants to murder him, but it could also be Justine as well. Because with a satisfied conscience, I know Victor complains of feeling guilty, but he doesn't say anything about the murder as well. Oh, praise the eternal justice of man. It's interesting that was mentioned later with reference to Justine. We're talking about the end of chapter 7, where Alphonse Frankenstein puts his faith in justice of man. And of course, justice in Frankenstein, in Shelley's novel, doesn't follow what you'd think it would do. Well, perhaps it does, I suppose, but this idea of human justice is flawed, and this idea the creature's mocking justice here as well, because he doesn't get any justice, and Justine doesn't get justice, and ultimately Victor dies, which you could say is justice done at the end of the novel. And this idea that Victor still responds with an abhorred devil, this kind of biblical imagery as well. There's still this sense of anger there as well. And then the creature resolves to tell Victor his story, and it does have an impact on Victor. I weighed the various arguments that he'd used, so that Victor's starting to think about what he said. And Victor also said, for the first time also, I felt what the duties of a creator towards his creature were, and that I ought to render him happy before I complained of his wickedness as well. And it's interesting that Victor's now starting to acknowledge that he has a role to play in the creature's life, the duties, the responsibility of a creator. So he has that responsibility. And, the first one is to listen to your child, your creation, as he's speaking. And he does do, I consent to listen, and listens to the creature's tale. And obviously there are further responsibilities that Victor says he will do and doesn't do as well. But this chapter 10, starts to set up that sense that actually the creature isn't this evil or entirely evil being that Victor has presented. There is reason behind his responses. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and the creature has suffered, and his reactions, however horrific, are a sense of justice being done. So there's lots of kind of key quotations you can write down and highlight. Page 77 in particular, there's lots of details there, lots of kind of similar quotations, wretch and devil, good one-word quotations that are perfect for analysis. Vile insect as well, this idea. Victor sees the creature as almost something he can just kind of play with, a toy with, like an insect, and trample as well, kind of give life to, experiment with, and then destroy. And the other thing is the kind of the creature's response, and the creature, saying, I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel as well. And there's lots of brilliant quotations that you can use to start to explain the relationship between Victor and the creature, and Victor's hatred for the creature, and how he's blinded by hatred compared to the creature's sense of reason, how the creature was a good, benevolent person and has been turned evil. So complete your note sheets on those quotations, and you find that chapter 10 is quite a good chapter to use for quotations, and also one that would come up in the exam, because there's a lot to say about what's going on as well. But don't also forget the kind of the natural details in chapter 9 that hint at the arrival of the creature as well.